Hi, welcome to another episode of Luncheonette with Laura Diaz. That's me. I'm really excited about today's episode. We're going to be talking to you about anger, and I know that anger has been a frequent training request that's come in and the behaviors associated with it. But first, I've got a few announcements for you. We have some really awesome conventions coming up that I hope some of you guys will be able to take advantage. First, there's the National Foster Care Conference. It's called Footsteps to the Future, and it's going to be in sunny Florida, sunny Clearwater Beach, and hopefully warm Clearwater Beach. And that's May 29th through the 31st. Then right behind that is going to be the National Independent Living Conference. So those of you who work with teens or have teens in your home, here's a great opportunity to learn more about what's going on with the Independent Living Program. And that's going to be August the 27th through 30th. Now we're going to show you the links to all these conferences online. So just take a look and you can click on it for more information. Okay. Then, coming up very soon in April is the 2013 Foster Adoption Kinship Awareness Day. Let me say that again. Foster Kinship Adoption Awareness Day. Try to say that 3 times in a row. Anyway, that's going to be Tallahassee. Everybody across the state. We're getting groups of foster parents to go and lobby and meet with legislators and talk about the things that are important to us. So I hope a lot of you can join that. We're going to show the link to that also. You have to sign up on the link because they're going to have a great lunch for you, and that's April 11th. Okay, and last but not least, we've got the exciting 2013 Bridge to the Future Florida State Foster Adoptive Parent Association Conference. That's going to be in Orlando on June 21st to 23rd. I will be there, and I hope all of you will be joining me there because there's going to be some great topics and a workshop, a QPI workshop that I'll be doing. So I hope you can make it and take a look at that. So without further ado, I'm so pleased to introduce our guest presenter today, and that is Dr. Scott Roger, and he's more commonly known in court and to all his clients and friends as Dr. Scott. He's with ChildNet, and he's going to share his thoughts with us on anger, dealing with kids with anger and aggression and some of those behaviors associated with it. So welcome, Dr. Scott, and thank you for joining us today.
Laura, great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, great. We're so happy to have you. So can you share with foster parents, like I said when we came on, it's one of the most common requests we get is training on anger and aggression and the behaviors that are associated with those. So can you kind of share some of the work you've done and some of your thoughts on how we can better deal with these with the children in our home?
Absolutely. And, so challenging behaviors that a lot of our foster kids have because of the experiences they've been through. But when they come to us, we don't necessarily know what experiences they've had. All we get is a kid who's maybe not that verbal. And there's a philosophy or a saying I like is kids don't so much tell us their problems as they do act them out. And when we see a lot of aggression and a lot of anger, they're usually acting out a lot of the trauma that they've been exposed to. At the same time, the anger and aggression gets directed towards the person who they're closest to. And a lot of times the person they're closest to is the foster parents.
And I certainly know how that feels. And it's hard as the foster parent to sometimes not take that personally. So I think it's true. We have to look at maybe what's causing that anger in them.
Absolutely. And to somehow not personalize it, even though it's directed at us. And that's the challenge. I think that's one of the bigger challenges of being a foster parent is hanging in there, dealing with an aggressive kid who may be destroying a house, maybe directing the anger towards the caretaker, or oftentimes the caretaker's own children who are in the home. And Laura, I know you have 3 children. I have 2 of my own. Your job primarily is to be the caretaker of your children and the foster children. And sometimes that creates a big challenge for our foster parents.
Absolutely. It's a couple things. It's trying to protect the children because sometimes when that anger is being turned on the other children in the home, you want to protect them and also help the child who has the anger issues and not create more anger by doing that.
Absolutely. And so, there's a philosophy, Goethe is famous for saying, he says a man, but I'll say child, treat a child as he is, and the child will continue to act as he is. Treat a child as he could be or ought to be, and that child will become even greater than you or he ever thought possible. And I think that dovetails with what you're saying about try to respond to the behavior and not the child. Try to lift the child through that aggressive episode or that angry outburst episode. The challenge is that oftentimes you're in the midst of the battle with the child in your home, and it's a challenge for sure.
It is, especially if after you've had like a long, hard day at work and you come home and the kids are just all crazed and hitting each other and angry and throwing things. It definitely is. So we could certainly use some good tips and techniques in dealing with it.
Okay, I have a quick disclaimer, so I'm going to put this out there. I've not fostered any children. I have 2 kids of my own, as I said, but I do mentor a lot of teens, and I mentor teen girls who are very challenging. We tend to have a lot of angry, aggressive teens because of the stuff that they've been through as children. And so this upcoming week, I have a special challenge to use these skills myself. I have a foster teen and her young child staying with us. So I'm here also. I'm excited to be part of this training, but I'm also going to use these tools myself, which I do in my practice because I work with all the foster children here in Broward County, which is Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
Good for you. It's like walk a day in my shoes, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I think our biggest resource we have at ChildNet, which is a private company that deals with all the foster children in South Florida, or actually Broward and Palm Beach County, our biggest resource is our foster families.
Well, good. So you want to talk a little bit about the trauma and how the kids kind of come to us so angry?
Yes. Well, I'll start with one of the things I do also is I sit in with the sheriff's office during the week and we listen to all the sexual abuse calls that come in. And what we find is, fortunately, not all of them are legitimate. Some of the calls are maybe people fabricating or making up stories, but unfortunately, at least half of the calls are accurate. And what the children are exposed to are things that most adults will never hopefully have to go through in their entire lives. And these are small children, sometimes as small as 2 or 3 or 4 years old, who are sexually abused by oftentimes the people who are supposed to be there caring for them. If not a direct parent, a parent's paramour, or somebody that they've allowed to stay in the home with them. So we have a lot of kids who've been exposed to abuse at an early age, and it may not be a one-time event. And what we see is the closer the person is to the child in their life, and the longer the amount and the severity of the abuse, the more problematic behaviors we see with that child as they get older. And so we call that complex trauma, which is trauma caused by a caretaker over a long period of time. And it's not all of our foster kids, but it's certainly a percentage of our foster kids who have this complex trauma, and they're the ones who tend to display the most anger and aggression. And
so do you see that is from the young children all the way up to the older children, or is it more during a certain age group?
But it's interesting. The research shows that the younger the child is, and even when they're pre-verbal, so even when the child is 6 months or 9 months old, if they're just exposed to domestic violence, that actually has a bigger impact the younger the child is, even if the abuse is not directly on them. So maybe they weren't physically abused, but they were exposed to domestic violence in the home. And so, yes, the younger the child is, the more likely it is to cause a bigger conflict for that child down the road.
Okay, that makes sense, though, if you think about it, because if you've grown up in an environment of watching, hitting, you're more likely to hit and, being yelled at and seeing that anger and aggression. It makes sense. So what do we do when we're in the middle of this situation, Scott, and we've got this anger going on? What do you recommend? How do we as foster parents deal with it?
One of the focuses that I find for not just foster parents, but for therapists, clinicians, social workers, and advocates is heal thyself. One of the things I've found is that the better we take care of ourselves, and we take care of ourselves emotionally, physically, and spiritually, we're in a better position to respond in a non-reactive way with the children. And so I think foremost is tuning in with ourselves and taking our own pulse, taking our temperature to where we're at during that day and how we're feeling. And what I find is the better state I'm in, the better able I am, and the better the people I work with, I see who work with the foster children, the better place they're in to take care of a child who's having a bad day. Because sometimes the child's not always angry, not constantly having outbursts, but they can have a bad day. And when they have a bad day, it's a bad day. And I think I'm preaching to the choir. I know the foster parents have been there. And the foster parents, they don't get to take a time out. They're responsible to care for that child 24/7. They get a little respite if the child goes to school or to a daycare center, or they have a family visit. And we'll get back to the family visits because those create some special problems with acting out after the family visits when they have a difficult family session. But the foster parents really are, their tool is themselves. And so I think the first step would be taking care of ourselves so that we're in the best position to be able to respond, not react to a child's angry outburst.
Okay, great. That makes a lot of sense. What about, okay, we got ourselves in a pretty good place, everything's going smoothly, but all of a sudden one of the kids in the home has a really bad anger outburst. They're throwing things, they're hitting other children in the home. What do you think? How do we handle that with the child? Is there certain things we should say at that point or certain actions we should take?
Yeah, and I think it depends on the age of the child. I know that when the children are younger, I often get down on their level. If the child is really young, and most of us are much taller than a child, if you get down on their level and you speak to them with a calm voice, I think that's one of the most powerful tools we have, is we tend to mirror each other's behaviors. So if the child is angry and aggressive and lashing out and breaking things, and we respond in the same aggressive, angry tone, it actually just amps up the situation. But if we get down on the floor and we talk in a calm level to a child, I often just kneel. I even do it in my office or even in the hallway. I get down on a kid's level every time I meet them. And that tends to have a real calming effect. Where I work, oftentimes we'll have the police bring a child in handcuffs who may even be intoxicated or using some type of drug, and they are very, very aggressive. They're banging their heads against the door outside, against the police officer, or trying to attack or lunge at people. And what I've found is I have a radio I keep in my office with some really good music. That's stuff that the kids are listening to, but that's calming. And calming music really has a way of de-escalating a situation. Now, if a child is being destructive and damaging your property, one of the things you want to do is try and get them to calm down and stop breaking things. If you go right into immediately throwing out what the consequences are going to be for their behavior, that may be counterproductive. Even though kids need to be held accountable for their behavior, oftentimes it's best to deal with the behavior first and the consequences later. And I think that's sometimes a trap we get into, and it leads to one of the most common I think challenges for foster parents is how to decide whether to hang in there and stay working with a foster kid who's angry and destructive and not give 30-day notice. I don't know if that's how it's commonly referred to as, but the 30-day notice is saying, I've tried with this child, but everything I'm doing isn't working, and I think it's time to part ways.
Right.
One of my biggest missions here at ChildNet is to work with foster parents to help preempt the 30-day notice and find tools and give resources to foster parents so that they don't get to a situation where they feel like they're no longer able to handle these outbursts. So there's a couple different strategies when the kids are older or they're bigger. I sometimes, if I have a good relationship with a child or I have some type of rapport or connection, I'll even just put a hand on their shoulder and say, can we talk for a second? I know you're having a tough day. And so empathy is huge, and I think touch is huge, but we have to be careful with touch because some kids who are traumatized, a touch can be a bad thing. And so that's something you really have to feel out for the kid and for yourself, how comfortable you are and how close you feel to the child.
Mm-hmm. That makes perfect sense, though, to me. So do you see a lot of these situations where the kids have this anger and everything? It also correlates a lot to the frequency of visits, and you touched on it a little bit, but that really hit a button with me because in my personal experience, I've seen a lot of increased anger following visits, and maybe sometimes the anxiety about the visits and their anxiety about going back home or what's going to happen, the uncertainties. Do you see a lot of that, and what's some thoughts around that area?
Wow, yeah, it's a loaded situation because certainly there's anxiety and tension and excitement sometimes building up to those visits. I get to sit in, I have a group of 5 psychology interns from the local university, and we supervise those visits when they're therapeutically indicated. And we see a lot of what happens throughout that hour or 2 hour visit. And a lot of times parents are still engaging in the same behaviors that were so problematic that the children were removed from their home. So the kids are coming back to meet with their parents, but they're getting the parent in the same place doing the same things that were problematic to begin with. That's not always the case, and I don't think it's the majority of the case. Other times parents are maybe making promises that set the kids up for an unrealistic expectation. They'll say, I'm doing everything I can and you're going to come home to me soon. And then that child is brought back to the foster home and the kid feels like, I'm leaving here soon. I don't have to follow any more rules. Or I'm going to be home soon, so whatever I do, they can't do anything to me or they can't enforce any rules. Or it just stirs up a lot of the original feelings and maybe even some of the original traumatic experiences or memories they've had from when they were with their parents or in their care from other people around their home. So it's a cauldron of a lot of different things that become a hot topic for that hot button for that kid and can lead to nightmares afterwards. We have kids who go home and they wet the bed. They have chronic nightmares. They have really bad days in school after a particularly difficult visit. And again, it falls back on the foster parents who are really there and the primary caretaker and guardian for this child and with them 24/7 to try and help navigate the child through this turbulence in their life. And at the same time, try and promote that connection with their parents. You know, just like with the kids, when we say there's no bad kids, only bad behaviors, there really are no bad parents, only bad parenting behaviors. A lot of the parents who are abusive or using substances come from a family where it's a second or third generation of the same abuse and substance use and the same patterns. So that's the challenge for the foster parents, is to deal with the fallout from these visits and also help the child remain connected to that foster family, because the goal for most of the children is to go back to their caretakers and not provide any false promises.
Mm-hmm. So, well, do you have some recommendations on either the preparation then for the visit to help alleviate some of this anger, or even after the visit to be able to maybe engage the children in some dialogue that might help them to not get so angry or to help them deal with their feelings?
Yeah, that's a great question, Laura. I could tell you some things I've learned experientially here at ChildNet, but also some literature I just read. It was a study I believe they did out in Seattle on 170 foster parents. And one of the things that foster parents say have been most effective is actually attending the sessions with the child, and sometimes actually sitting in on the session with the parents, if appropriate, or if you have the time, or if the parent is open to it. A lot of times, this is an aside, a lot of times parents are not as appreciative of what the foster parents are actually doing for their children, not because they don't love that somebody's caring for their child, but because it creates a lot of shame that they're not able to care for the child the way the foster family is.
Well, and I also think, Scott, that there's a fear that the children are going to become more bonded to the foster parent. So it does kind of create that little bit of alienation there, like, you're doing a better job and my kids are going to like you better.
Absolutely. That's a huge underlying fear. Sometimes they voice it, sometimes the parents don't. And sometimes, unfortunately, and that's our job here as clinicians, is that the actual biological parents will try and undermine the foster parents during that visit, or try and create some friction when the children go back into the home. And that's our job, to help redirect the foster parent and the children so that they don't get mixed messages from the parents or get any of those behaviors from the family.
Well, and I think that we as foster parents can help in that too, by early on in the relationship letting the biological parents know that we're not there to take their children. We're just there to help keep them safe and give them a home while the parent is, rehabilitating or, getting their things together to get the child back, so they don't think we're out to steal their children.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a fear. And, I think some parents are more receptive to that than others. And, foster parents are really there to help support the child, but to help to support the child going back to that home environment. Hopefully that's been changed and the parents have benefited from therapy.
I agree. That's an important thing, that we work as a team, and it's obviously very big in the QPI, Quality Parenting Initiative, and you can see lots of our training videos that have talked about that. partnership and working together as a team for those. So, okay, so what about when you think your child is talking to the case manager or telling their parents things that you're doing that are not true?
Oh, very interesting. And you and I talked about this a little earlier this morning, when children make false reports or report behaviors that maybe are going on, but they exaggerate. And Laura and I were talking about, we know kids exaggerate. I wanted to share a quick story. The other day, my kids are out for spring break today, but last week it was full on school. We had to get the kids ready for school. My wife wanted to go run to the grocery store at 7 in the morning. So usually she makes their lunch and I make breakfast, but we were waiting for her to come back. And my son did a really interesting thing is when my wife came back and we weren't ready like we were supposed to be, my son told my wife that he asked me 3 times to make breakfast, but I refused to do it. And that never happened. My son, who I've lived with for 8 years, 24/7, straight lied on me. And it kind of made me laugh and it kind of made me angry.
So who did your wife believe?
You know what's funny is she believes a little bit of truth in both of us. So she knew I was playing around on the computer and so were the kids. So we were all guilty as charged. What it really reminded me of, because the next day I'd actually done a stress management training with the foster families, that's just in a house with a child that has known you. And like you said, Laura, they know your whole history and they know you as a safe and reliable and consistent person. A lot of times the foster kids aren't sure how you're going to respond to them. So there's a lot of insecurity and uncertainty. And a lot of times when they make up these stories, it's to see how you're going to react. And it is a challenge because those reports get made and they also go into your file and this is your profession. You're doing this out of love, but it's also your career. And these reports can have some serious consequences if they're not cleared. And so I think that's another one of the biggest challenges for foster parents is how to handle with some of the behaviors that are reported back to either the foster agency or to the foster parent agency. And it's a challenge, but I think the best way to deal with it is just being upfront, not responding to the child's behavior, but just being consistent and saying, honey, I know you're having a tough time, and I know that you're saying that this is what happened, but really this is what happened, and giving kind of the child an opportunity to see that you're not going to retaliate, but at the same time, you're going to express what really happened. And hopefully what I see the majority of the time is the supervisors of these foster parent agencies are really good at wanting to know everything and supporting the foster parents, but also knowing that some foster parents may need to add some extra skills because they're dealing with challenging behaviors. And it becomes an opportunity for a foster parent to learn new skills on how to respond to these children. So sometimes a bad situation could actually become a good opportunity for everyone. One of the things too I'll add, and maybe Laura, you've done this before, I know I've done it quite a few times, is we are not perfect, even though we're the adults. And one of the most healing things I think we do with any children, whether it's foster children or our own kids, are admit when we made a mistake or admit that we could have done something differently. Maybe not that what we did was wrong, but what we could have done is something different had we had more time or known more about what was going on for that child. And I think that's one of the biggest therapeutic things any parent can do is to take some ownership of or be open to doing things differently and negotiating with children, whether they're 4 years old or 14-year-olds. And certainly the older the child is, the more negotiating that should be going on.
Well, it's a good point because we're always telling our children, you apologize for that and, or admit you did this. And if we're not modeling that, how can we expect them to do it? So I think that's a really good point. And another thing that you just mentioned that I think is important is getting services. So you were touching on that, working with professionals. If you get in and you think it's a little bit over your head or those behaviors are starting to escalate and you just, you think you can't deal with that right away, I say, get services, get a therapist with the child. And personally, I think it's important to really engage with the therapist because it's not only the child that needs the help. It's how do we deal with that child's specific behaviors. Do you agree?
Oh, 100%. And I think the outcomes we see that have the best outcomes for the foster children are when the foster parent, the therapist, and we call them child advocates or the case manager, are all working together on the same team and sharing resources, because foster parents, teachers even, and therapists all bring different strengths to the equation, and when they're sharing them together and they're all on the same page, we see the absolute best outcomes. Absolutely, Lauren.
Okay, that's wonderful. Well, we're almost out of time here, Scott. So do you have any other parting thoughts that you really feel would be helpful? You know, just think of those foster parents right now that are ready to give up on those kids, that they just think they can't take another day of this anger and aggressive behaviors. You know, what would you say to them?
Well, I would say two things. I'll say the very first one first. I think it was Sir Winston Churchill who said, never, never, never give up. Sometimes you need to take a break, but never give up. I've yet to meet a foster child, and I've been working as a clinician for close to 20 years and at ChildNet directly with the foster children for 7 years. I've never met a kid who was a lost cause. So never give up, but it doesn't mean that being with that child at that point in your life and their life is always the right fit either. So I don't want to say never get some distance or take a break, but never give up on the child. Maybe it's just not a good fit at that time in your life. And then the second thing I would just share real quickly, I had the opportunity, I often get to do stress management workshops with foster parents. And what I realized, I have everybody stand up in the room and I ask them, how many people have been a foster parent for the last 1 to 2 years? How many people have been a foster parent for 2 to 5 years? And slowly the room starts to sit down for those people who haven't been for 10 years or 15 years. And what I find is in that room, I had somebody last week who had been foster parenting for 24 years. That collectively among the foster parents, they have more experience than I or many clinicians really have, that they're their own best resources. And I highly encourage foster parents getting together on a weekly or monthly basis and using each other as a support line, just to have somebody else who knows what you're going through, who can share some experiences that they've had with similar kids or oftentimes the same kids that have worked for them. So using other foster parents as resources, and then also having other support groups or therapy or finding books on the subject or finding a lot of great websites that have good material to help support and continue to grow. I think continuing education for all of us as parents, foster parents, as professional clinicians, that we need to constantly be building our toolbox or our skill repertoire, working on ourselves to be better able to handle kids. So that would be one of the main points I like to stress and encourage with the foster families.
Okay, that's awesome. It's great information and you're a great resource, and I appreciate you coming on here and talking to us about this, and I hope that we will hear more from you in the future in dealing with our children. So thank you so much, Dr. Scott.
Excellent. Thanks. It was great being here and always great talking to you, Lauren.
Same here. Thank you so much. And what a great lead-in. You know, Dr. Scott just told us about resources and website, and I hope that you'll go to www.qpiflorida.com. Now remember, we made some enhancements to that website, so that's going to take you into the main site, which has got a lot of, the main QPI information, but our portal to just-in-time training is right there on that site, or you can go straight to www.jitfl.com, and that's for Just in Time Florida. And then, of course, we have a whole directory of trainings on all kinds of topics and things related to system of care, behaviors, and everything's there. We're always anxious to hear from you guys. So if you can go to either to request training there or to our Facebook page at Just in Time Training, or you can email us, and we're going to put our email address right here on the screen, and we'd love to hear from you. Suggestions, topics, your thoughts, your comments. We're here for you. This show is for you. So we want to help you in your day-to-day journey with your fostering. So please send us your thoughts, your comments, your suggestions. And I want to again thank you all for joining us today. Thank Dr. Scott again for sharing all this great information on, children and anger and those angry behaviors. And we look forward to seeing you on our next show, where we're going to be talking about sexual abuse and the behaviors associated with children who have been sexually abused. So we're looking forward to that. We've got a great presentation. So thanks again for joining us, and have a great week.